The knife was at my throat before I even heard him enter the room. I should have been terrified. Any normal person would have screamed, would have begged, would have done something other than what I did, which was laugh. "You're holding it wrong," I said, my voice steady despite the cold metal pressing against my carotid artery. "If you actually wanted to kill me, you'd angle the blade toward my trachea, not my jugular. Jugular bleeds out slow. I'd have time to scream." The pressure against my neck faltered for just a moment, long enough for me to slam my elbow backward into his solar plexus and spin away, putting the king-sized bed between us. That's when I saw his face. Lim Dongwoo stood in the moonlight, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Busan penthouse. His white dress shirt splattered with something dark that I refused to identify. His chest heaved with exertion, and his eyes, those impossibly dark eyes that had made me agree to this insane arrangement 3 months ago, were wild with something I'd never seen in them before. Fear. Not fear of me. Fear for me. "They found out," he said, his voice raw. "Tessa, they know about the contract. They know about the baby." My hand moved instinctively to my stomach, to the small bump that had just begun to show beneath my silk nightgown. The bump that wasn't supposed to exist. The child that had never been part of our arrangement. Who knows? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. The Zhang family. Dongwoo's jaw tightened. "They've put a price on your head. 200 million won. Dead only." I did the math automatically, a habit from years of calculating whether I could afford both groceries and my student loan payment in the same month. 200 million won. Roughly $150,000. Funny, that was almost exactly what I still owed in nursing school debt. "Well," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded, "at least now I know what I'm worth." Dongwoo crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed my shoulders. His grip, just shy of painful. "This isn't a joke, Tessa. These people, they don't make threats. They make promises, and they always collect." I looked up at the man I'd agreed to pretend to love for money. The man whose child I was now carrying. The man who ran the largest criminal organization on the Korean peninsula and who had, against all odds and against all reason, become the person I trusted most in this world. "Then I guess," I said slowly, "you'd better tell me everything you've been hiding, starting with who you really are." Dongwoo's expression shuddered, that familiar wall slamming down behind his eyes. But for the first time since I'd known him, I saw it crack. "If I tell you," he said quietly, "you'll never look at me the same way again." I thought about the blood on his shirt, the knife that had been at my throat, the price on my head, the baby growing inside me. "Dongwoo," I said, "I stopped looking at you the same way the night you held my hair back while I vomited from morning sickness and then made me ginger tea at 3 a.m. Whatever you tell me now, it's not going to be worse than that." He almost smiled. Almost. "You might be surprised," he said, and then he began to talk. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up with a mafia boss's baby and a death sentence in a foreign country, you need to know how it started. You need to know about the night I met Lim Dongwoo, the night I agreed to sell my soul for $2 million. And you need to know about the one rule I swore I would never break. The rule I shattered into 1,000 pieces the moment I fell in love with him. 3 months earlier, I was standing in the cramped break room of Chicago Metropolitan Emergency Department, staring at a letter that was about to ruin my life. "Final notice," the header screamed in aggressive red letters. "Account severely past due. Legal action will commence in 30 days. $212,000. That's what I owed in student loans, the price of becoming a registered nurse with a bachelor's degree from a decent university. I'd been making payments for 6 years, and thanks to the magic of compound interest, I now owed more than when I started. My phone buzzed with a text from my younger brother Darius. "K sis, got the internship. They want me to start Monday, but I need $2,000 for the security deposit on an apartment near the office. Any chance you could help? I'll pay you back, I swear. I closed my eyes and leaned against the vending machine that had eaten my last dollar 20 minutes ago without dispensing anything. Darius was 23, brilliant, and had just landed a software engineering internship at a tech company that could change his entire future. Our mother had worked 2 jobs to keep us fed after our father left. She died of a heart attack at 52, probably from the stress of carrying our family on her back for 2 decades. I would not let her sacrifice be for nothing. I would not let Darius lose this opportunity because I couldn't scrape together $2,000. But I had $347 in my checking account, and payday was 9 days away. Collins. Dr. Reeves's voice cut through my spiral of despair. We've got a situation. VIP patient incoming private ambulance. I need you in Trauma Bay 2. I shoved the letter into my locker and grabbed my stethoscope. Personal crisis later. Patients now. That was the only way I'd survived this long. The man on the gurney didn't look like a VIP. He looked like someone had used his face as a punching bag and then decided to add a few knife wounds for good measure. Both eyes were swelling shut. His lip was split to the bone, and blood soaked through the makeshift bandages wrapped around his torso. But it was the men surrounding him that caught my attention. 4 of them, all in identical black suits, all with the same cold, watchful eyes. They stood at military attention despite the chaos of the emergency room, their gazes tracking every movement of the medical staff with predatory focus. What happened? I asked, pulling on gloves as I approached the gurney. One of the suits stepped forward. Car accident, he said flatly, his accent Korean. He was driving. I looked at the patient's wounds. The lacerations on his face were too clean for broken glass. The bruising pattern on his ribs suggested repeated blows, not impact trauma. And the way his wrists were raw and abraded, that wasn't from a seatbelt. This man wasn't in a car accident, I said quietly. This man was tortured. The suited man's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of surprise, quickly suppressed. Your job is to fix him, he said, not to ask questions. I should have let it go. I should have done my job, collected my paycheck, and gone home to figure out how to tell Darius I couldn't help him. That's what a smart person would have done. But I've never been particularly smart when someone tells me to mind my own business. My job, I said, stepping closer to the suited man, is to provide appropriate medical care. And I can't do that if I don't know what actually happened to him. So either you tell me the truth, or I call the police and let them figure it out. The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. The 4 suits exchanged glances, and I suddenly became very aware of the bulges beneath their jackets that probably weren't cell phones. And then the man on the gurney laughed. It was a wet, painful sound, but unmistakably a laugh. He opened his one eye that wasn't completely swollen shut, dark brown, almost black, with a spark of amusement that seemed completely inappropriate given his condition. I like her, he said, his voice ragged but clear. His English was perfect, with just a hint of accent. She's got fire. Sir, you shouldn't speak, one of the suits said urgently. We need to. What you need, the man on the gurney interrupted, is to tell this very capable nurse what happened so she can do her job. He tried to smile, then winced as it pulled at his split lip. Besides, she already knows I wasn't in a car accident. Lying to her now would just be insulting. The suited man who'd spoken to me earlier pressed his lips together in obvious displeasure, but he nodded once. He was taken, the suit said, held for approximately 6 hours. We recovered him 40 minutes ago. Taken by who? Business competitors. I had a feeling that business competitors was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence, but I let it go. I had what I needed. Okay, I said, turning to assess the patient properly. I need a full blood panel, CT of the head and abdomen, and let's get an ultrasound to check for internal bleeding. Sir, can you tell me your name? Lim Dongwoo, he said, and then, because he apparently couldn't help himself, he added, but you can call me Dongwoo. Given the circumstances, I think we can skip the formalities. I raised an eyebrow. Given the circumstances, Mr. Lim, I think you should focus on not dying while I try to keep you alive. Dongwoo, he corrected. And for what it's worth, I don't intend to die today. I have a meeting tomorrow that I'd hate to miss. What kind of meeting is more important than recovering from torture? That spark of amusement returned to his eye, the kind where I make the people who did this to me very, very sorry. I stared at him for a long moment, trying to reconcile the broken body on the gurney with the casual menace in his voice. This wasn't just some rich businessman who'd gotten caught up in something over his head. This was someone for whom violence was a native language. Well, I said finally, let's make sure you live long enough to attend. It took 4 hours. For hours of blood tests and imaging and carefully stitching wounds that had clearly been inflicted by someone who knew exactly how to cause maximum pain without hitting anything vital. For hours of watching Lim Dongwoo bear it all with a stoic endurance that spoke of practice. When it was finally over, when he was stable enough to move to a private room that his people had somehow commandeered on the top floor of the hospital, I found myself lingering at his bedside, checking his vitals one more time. You're off duty, he said. His voice was stronger now, though still rough. Both his eyes were open, watching me with that unsettling intensity. I heard the nurse's shift change an hour ago. I wanted to make sure you were stable before I left. Liar. The corner of his mouth twitched. You're curious about me. You want to know what kind of man gets tortured by business competitors and then jokes about it while he's bleeding all over your emergency room. I should have denied it. Instead, I pulled up a chair and sat down. Fine, I said. I'm curious. What kind of man are you, Dongwoo? He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with those dark eyes. Then he said something I didn't expect. What's wrong? I blinked. What? Something's wrong. Something was wrong before I arrived. I could see it when you walked into the trauma bay. You're worried about something. Money, probably, given the way you're wearing scrubs that have been washed so many times the color's fading. He tilted his head slightly. Am I close? I should have been offended. Instead, I felt oddly exposed, like he'd peeled back my skin and looked directly at my bones. That's none of your business, I said. No, he agreed. It isn't. But I'm going to make you an offer anyway, and I want you to understand why I'm making it. An offer? I have a problem, Dongwoo said. And you have a problem. I think we might be able to solve each other's problems. I'm not interested in becoming a kept woman for some rich. My grandmother is dying. The words stopped me mid-sentence. Dongwoo's expression had changed. That layer of sardonic amusement stripped away to reveal something raw underneath. She's 91 years old, he continued. She raised me after my parents died. She's the only family I have left, and she spent the last 20 years begging me to get married and give her great-grandchildren before she dies. He paused. I've disappointed her in every other way possible. I don't want to disappoint her in this. So what? You want me to marry you? I want you to pretend to be engaged to me. 3 months, maybe 4, however long she has left. You'll live in my home, attend family events, and convince her that I've finally found someone worthy of carrying on the family name. He met my eyes steadily. In exchange, I'll pay off your debt. All of it. Plus a settlement of $500,000 when the contract ends. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. You can't possibly know how much I owe. $212,000 in student loans, Dongwoo said, plus approximately $15,000 in credit card debt, mostly medical bills from when your mother was sick. Your brother is about to lose an opportunity because he needs $2,000 you don't have. Your car payment is 3 months past due, and you're one missed shift away from losing your apartment. My blood ran cold. How do you know all that? I had someone look into you while you were stitching my face back together. He said it like it was the most normal thing in the world. I needed to know if you could be trusted. And can I? You could have called the police the moment you realized I wasn't in a car accident. You could have looked the other way and let me bleed. Instead, you got in my man's face and demanded the truth so you could do your job properly. Something that might have been respect flickered across his features. Yes, Tessa Collins. I believe you can be trusted. I stood up, so abruptly the chair scraped against the floor. You're insane, I said. This is insane. You're asking me to lie to a dying woman, to pretend to be something I'm not, to. I'm asking you to give an old woman peace in her final days. Dongwoo interrupted quietly. I'm asking you to let her die believing that her grandson won't be alone in this world. He paused. Is that really so different from the lies we tell terminal patients every day? The ones where we say you're going to be fine when we know perfectly well they're not. I had no response to that, because he was right and we both knew it. I need to think about it, I said finally. Of course. Dongwoo gestured to one of the suits standing by the door. Juno will give you a number to call when you've made your decision. But Tessa, he waited until I met his eyes. Don't take too long. My grandmother's heart is failing. The doctors give her 2 months, maybe 3. I took the card from the man called Juno and walked out of the hospital into the gray Chicago dawn. My hands were shaking. My mind was racing. Everything I'd ever believed about myself, that I was a good person, that I had integrity, that there were some things I wouldn't do for money, was suddenly up for debate. I went home. I sat in my dark apartment with the eviction notice on the counter and the final notice letter in my bag. I thought about Darius and the opportunity he was about to lose. I thought about my mother, working herself to death so her children could have better lives. And then I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the card. I'll do it, I said when someone answered. But I have conditions. 1 week later, I stood in the arrival hall of Gimhae International Airport in Busan, South Korea, clutching a carry-on bag that contained everything I deemed essential for the next 3 to 4 months of my new fake life. Dongwoo had recovered with inhuman speed, something I'd chalked up to excellent genetics and sheer force of will. He'd been discharged from the hospital 3 days after his car accident, and 2 days after that, he'd sent me a first-class plane ticket and a contract that was 73 pages long. I'd read every single page, twice. The terms were straightforward. I would pose as his fiancée for the duration of his grandmother's illness. I would live in his family home, attend family functions, and maintain the illusion of a loving relationship. In exchange, all my debts would be paid immediately, and I would receive $500,000 upon completion of the contract. There were other clauses, too. Confidentiality agreements, a stipulation that I maintain a respectful distance from his business operations, and an interesting paragraph about what would happen if either of us developed romantic feelings during the arrangement. Short version, we were to immediately disclose such feelings to the other party and renegotiate terms. It was the most unromantic thing I'd ever read. But it was the final clause that had given me pause. The one that stated in cold legalese that any child conceived during the contract period would be considered the property and responsibility of the Lim family. I'd almost backed out when I read that. The word property in relation to a potential human being made my skin crawl. But Dongwoo had assured me that the clause was merely a legal formality, a protection against gold diggers who might try to trap him with a pregnancy. Physical intimacy wasn't part of our arrangement. There would be no child. Famous last words, as it turned out. But I didn't know that yet. Miss Collins. I turned to find a young woman approaching me, her black hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, her tailored suit somehow making her look both professional and dangerous. I'm Han Yuna, she said in flawless English. Mr. Lim's personal assistant. I'll be taking you to the estate. The estate. Not the house. The estate. I followed Yuna out of the airport and into a waiting black SUV that probably cost more than I'd make in a decade of nursing. The driver pulled smoothly into traffic, and I found myself staring out the window at a city I'd never seen before. Busan was nothing like I'd expected. I'd imagined something like the Seoul I'd seen in K-dramas, all glass towers and neon lights. Instead, Busan felt older, grittier, more real. The ocean glinted between buildings and mountains rose in the distance, their peaks shrouded in morning mist. "Have you ever been to Korea before?" Yuna asked. "No," I admitted. "This is my first time out of the country." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or curiosity. "Mr. Lim mentioned you were unconventional. Is that what he called it?" The ghost of a smile touched her lips. He used several words. Unconventional was the most polite one. Despite my nerves, I laughed. That sounds about right. The drive took us out of the city proper and into the hills north of Busan. The buildings grew sparser, replaced by walls of green forest and occasional glimpses of traditional Korean architecture. And then, after passing through a checkpoint manned by men who looked remarkably similar to the suits who'd surrounded Dongwoo in the hospital, we turned onto a private road that wound through manicured gardens toward the largest house I'd ever seen. Estate was, if anything, an understatement. The main building was traditional Korean architecture. Curved tile roofs, wooden beams, paper screens, but massive, sprawling across the hillside like it had grown there organically over centuries. Smaller buildings dotted the grounds. What looked like guest houses, a structure that might have been a dojo, and several modern additions that had been carefully designed to complement rather than clash with the traditional aesthetic. "The Lim family has lived on this land for 11 generations, Yuna said as the car pulled to a stop. The original structure dates back to the Joseon dynasty. Mr. Lim's grandfather modernized the main house in the 1960s, but the family quarters remain largely unchanged. I stepped out of the car on shaky legs, suddenly feeling the weight of what I'd agreed to. This wasn't just pretending to date some rich guy. This was inserting myself into a dynasty, a family with roots that went back centuries. What right did I have to be here? "Miss Collins." The voice came from the front steps, and I looked up to find Dongwoo walking toward me. He looked different here. In Chicago, even battered and bloody, he'd seemed like a visitor, a fish out of water. But standing in front of his ancestral home, wearing a simple gray hanbok that somehow made him look both ancient and ageless. He belonged in a way that made my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't name. "Welcome to my home," he said, stopping in front of me. His face had healed remarkably well, just fading bruises and a thin scar along his jawline that would probably disappear in a few weeks. I hoped the journey wasn't too taxing. "It was fine," I said, then winced at how awkward I sounded. The plane was very comfortable. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "We'll need to work on that." "On what?" "On you looking at me like I'm a stranger you're being forced to make small talk with." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "My grandmother is sharp. Sharper than her doctors give her credit for. If you can't sell this, she'll know something's wrong." "Then maybe you should have given me more than a week to prepare," I shot back. "I didn't have more than a week." His voice dropped even lower, and for a moment, something raw showed in his eyes. "She's worse than the doctors predicted. We may only have a few weeks." All my irritation evaporated. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be convincing." He straightened and offered me his arm. "Come. She's waiting to meet you." The interior of the house was even more beautiful than the exterior. Wooden floors polished to a mirror shine, screens painted with mounted landscapes, antique furniture that probably belonged in a museum. Staff in traditional dress bowed as we passed, their eyes curious but carefully averted, and then we reached a room at the end of a long corridor and Dongwoo stopped. "Before we go in," he said quietly, "there are things you should know." "Such as?" "My grandmother knows what I am, what I do. She's never approved, but she's never tried to stop me either. She believes family is more important than anything else, including the law." He paused. "She will test you. She'll ask questions designed to trip you up. to see if you're worthy of being part of this family. Answer honestly whenever you can. Lie only when necessary. And how will I know the difference? You won't. His expression was unreadable. That's the test. Before I could respond, he slid open the door. The room was traditional, spare, lit by natural light filtering through paper screens. In the center, propped against a mountain of silk cushions, was the smallest, oldest, most terrifying woman I had ever seen. Lim Hae-suk looked like she might have been beautiful once, before age had carved her down to the bone. Her white hair was pulled back from a face that was more wrinkled than skin, and her hands, folded in her lap, were gnarled with arthritis. But her eyes, those dark eyes that were so like her grandson's, were sharp and clear and absolutely merciless. "Grandmother," Dongwoo said, dropping to his knees beside her and taking her hand. "I have brought her." Hae-suk didn't look at him. She looked at me, standing frozen in the doorway, feeling like a specimen under a microscope. "Come here," she said. Her voice was stronger than I'd expected, and her English, while accented, was perfect. "Let me see you properly." I walked toward her on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. When I reached the cushions, I wasn't sure what to do. Did I kneel? Bow? Shake her hand? Hae-suk solved the problem by reaching up and grabbing my chin with surprisingly strong fingers, turning my face this way and that in the light. "Good bones," she said, as if I were a horse she was considering purchasing. "Strong jaw, clear eyes." She released my chin and sat back. "She's not Korean." "No, grandmother." "She's not even Asian." "No. The family will talk. They'll say you've lost your mind. They'll say you've forgotten your heritage, your responsibilities." Hae-suk's eyes never left mine. "What do you have to say for yourself, girl?" I glanced at Dongwoo, but his face was carefully blank. "No help there. I'd say," I said slowly, "that what people say about us matters a lot less than what we actually are." Hae-suk's eyebrows rose. "And what are you?" I thought about the truth, that I was a nurse from Chicago who'd agreed to lie to a dying woman for money. I thought about the lie, that I was a woman who'd fallen in love with her grandson and wanted nothing more than to be part of this family. And then I thought about what Dongwoo had said. "Answer honestly whenever you can." "I'm someone who knows what it's like to love your family so much you'd do anything for them," I said. "I'm someone who worked double shifts for 3 years to pay for my brother's education. I'm someone who held my mother's hand while she died and promised her I'd take care of everyone she left behind." I met Hae-suk's eyes steadily. "I don't know if I'm worthy of your grandson, Mrs. Lim, but I know that I understand what family means, and I know that I don't take that lightly." The room was silent for a long moment. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel Dongwoo's tension radiating from where he knelt beside his grandmother. And then Hae-suk laughed. It was a wheezy, crackling sound, but it was unmistakably a laugh. She reached out and patted my hand with surprising gentleness. "Good," she said. "Good. You have fire, this one. I can see why my grandson likes you." She turned to Dongwoo, and her expression softened into something that looked almost like love. "You may have chosen well after all, my boy." "Thank you, grandmother." "Don't thank me yet," I said, May. She waved her hand dismissively. "Now go. Both of you. I'm tired, and you have much to discuss before dinner." We retreated from the room, and as soon as the door slid shut behind us, I sagged against the wall. That was terrifying. Dongwoo supplied. "Yes, she has that effect on people." I was going to say intense, but terrifying works too. He almost smiled. "You did well. Better than I expected." High praise from the man who called me unconventional. I also called you stubborn, reckless, and disturbingly observant. He began walking down the corridor, and I fell into step beside him. "I stand by all of those assessments." "Where are we going?" "To your room. You'll need to rest before dinner." He paused at a junction of hallways. Dinner will be complicated. More complicated than your grandmother? My grandmother is the easy part. Dongwoo's expression darkened. Tonight, you'll meet the rest of the family. My uncle and his wife. My 3 cousins. The various hangers-on who've attached themselves to the Lim name over the years. He glanced at me. Not all of them will be pleased that I'm engaged to an outsider. Some of them will try to drive you away. Others will try to use you against me. Use me how? That depends on what they think they can get away with. We stopped in front of a wooden door that looked older than my country. Your room is here. My room is across the hall. If you need anything at all, you come to me first. Not the staff. Not my family. Me. Why? Dongwoo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because not everyone in this house is trustworthy. And until I know who is, I need to keep you close. He slid open the door to reveal a room that was beautiful and traditional and about 4 times the size of my entire Chicago apartment. But I'd barely registered any of it because his words were still echoing in my mind. Not everyone in this house is trustworthy. Dongwoo, I said as he turned to leave. What kind of family did I just agree to join? He looked back at me, and for just a moment his mask slipped. I saw exhaustion there and grief, and something that looked almost like regret. The kind, he said quietly, that destroys everything it touches, including sometimes itself. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in a room full of shadows, wondering what the hell I'd gotten myself into. Dinner was a battlefield disguised as a meal. The dining room was enormous, with a table long enough to seat 30. Tonight, only 12 seats were occupied, but the tension in the room could have filled a stadium. I sat at Dongwoo's right hand, wearing a dress that Yuna had laid out for me. A deep burgundy hanbok that had been modified to be more form-fitting than traditional. It was beautiful and expensive and made me feel like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life, which I suppose I was. So, the voice came from across the table, where a man in his 60s sat with his wife. Dongwoo's Uncle Lim Jae-sung and his wife Park Mina. This is the woman who's captured my nephew's heart. His tone made it clear he didn't believe that for a second. Yes, uncle, Dongwoo said calmly, placing his hand over mine on the table in a gesture that looked possessive but felt protective. This is Tessa. Tessa. Jae-sung rolled the name around his mouth like he was tasting something bitter. An American name. I am American, I said, keeping my voice pleasant. From Chicago. Chicago. Jae-sung's wife Mina leaned forward, her perfectly made-up face arranged in an expression of false interest. Is that near New York? About as near as Busan is to Seoul, I replied. Give or take. Someone down the table coughed, and I caught a flash of amusement from one of the younger family members. A woman about my age with sharp eyes and an expensive haircut. Tessa is a nurse, Dongwoo said, steering the conversation. She works in emergency medicine. She's one of the best trauma nurses in her hospital. A nurse. Mina's tone made the word sound like a disease. How practical. I've always believed there's honor in work that helps people, I said. But I understand that's a foreign concept in some circles. The temperature at the table dropped about 10 degrees. Mina's smile became fixed, and Jae-sung's eyes narrowed. You have quite a tongue on you, he said. I've been told. It's one of the things I love about her, Dongwoo said smoothly. She's not afraid to speak her mind. It's refreshing after years of people telling me only what they think I want to hear. The subtle dig wasn't lost on anyone at the table. I saw Jae-sung's jaw tighten and his wife's hand clench around her chopsticks. Tell me, Mina said, her voice syrupy sweet. How did you two meet? Dongwoo has always been so private about his personal life. Dongwoo and I had prepared for this question. We had a whole backstory ready, a fictional meeting at a charity event, a whirlwind courtship, the usual romantic nonsense. But looking at Mina's smug face, I decided to improvise. He was brought into my emergency room after being tortured, I said conversationally. I stitched up his face while his bodyguards lied to me about what happened. We bonded over his refusal to accept pain medication and his truly terrible sense of humor. Dead silence. Dongwoo's hand tightened on mine, whether in warning or approval, I couldn't tell. Mina seemed at a loss for words. That's quite a story, isn't it? I smiled brightly. I've always thought that you can tell a lot about a person by how they handle pain. Your nephew handled it with more grace than anyone I've ever met. Well, Jae-sung cleared his throat. That's certainly unconventional. There was that word again. I was beginning to think it was the Lim family's way of saying, "We don't know what to do with you." I've never been particularly interested in convention, I said. I find it gets in the way of actually living. The sharp-eyed young woman down the table laughed out loud. I like her, she announced, raising her glass. Appa, you actually found someone interesting. I'm impressed. Tessa, this is my cousin Lim Soo-jin, Dongwoo said, and I caught the warmth in his voice. She's the only member of my family who doesn't make me want to throw myself off a cliff. Rude, but accurate, Soo-jin said cheerfully. Welcome to the family, Tessa. It's terrible, but at least the food is good. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of delicious food and subtle warfare. Every question was a trap, every compliment a veiled insult. I learned that Jae-sung believed he should have inherited leadership of the family business instead of Dongwoo. That Mina had been angling for years to get her eldest son married to a chaebol heiress. That the other cousins were a mix of sycophants and opportunists, all waiting to see which way the wind would blow. By the time the final course was served, I was exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. You did well, Dongwoo murmured as we finally escaped to the garden. The night air was cool, and I could hear the distant sound of water from what I assumed was a fountain or stream. Better than well, actually. I think you've genuinely thrown them off balance. Is that a good thing? It's an excellent thing. When they're off balance, they make mistakes. He led me along a stone path that wound through artfully arranged trees and flowers. My uncle has been positioning himself to take over for years. He thought my grandmother's failing health would be his opportunity. Your arrival complicates his plans. Because he can't take over if you have an heir. Dongwoo stopped walking. Who told you about that? No one. I'm just not stupid. I turned to face him. Your family is traditional. The estate, the hierarchy, the way everyone defers to you. This isn't just about business, is it? There's something else. Something that's passed down through the bloodline. For a long moment, Dongwoo just looked at me. Then he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. I should have known you'd figure it out. Figure what out? The Lim family has controlled organized crime in Busan for over 100 years, Dongwoo said quietly. My great-great-grandfather built an empire on smuggling and gambling. My grandfather expanded into legitimate business. My father tried to go fully legal, and he was killed for it when I was 7 years old. I felt my stomach drop. Killed. Murdered. By rivals who saw weakness in his desire to change. Dongwoo's voice was flat and motionless, but I could see the pain in his eyes. My grandmother raised me after that. She taught me that the only way to survive in this world is to be stronger and more ruthless than everyone who wants to take what's yours. And are you? Stronger and more ruthless. His smile was bitter. What do you think? I thought about the blood on his shirt the night I'd met him, the casual menace in his voice when he'd talked about making his torturers sorry, the way his bodyguards moved like soldiers, always ready for violence. I think you're whatever you need to be, I said finally, and I think it's killing you slowly. Dongwoo's expression flickered, surprise, then something softer that was gone before I could name it. You see too much, he said quietly. It's a gift. It's a liability. He started walking again, faster this time. In my world, People who see too much tend to end up dead. Is that a threat? It's a warning. He stopped at a small pavilion overlooking what I now saw was a pond, its surface silver with reflected moonlight. My grandmother is dying. When she's gone, there will be a power struggle. My uncle will make his move, and others will follow. There will be blood. There may be deaths. He turned to face me. You need to understand that this contract has put you in danger. Real danger. Not just social embarrassment or family drama. I'm talking about people who would kill you without hesitation if they thought it would advance their position. Then why did you bring me here? I demanded. If it's so dangerous, why involve me at all? Because my grandmother asked me for one thing before she dies. One thing in 91 years of loving me, despite everything I am. She wanted to meet the woman I would spend my life with. She wanted to believe I wouldn't be alone. His voice cracked almost imperceptibly. I couldn't tell her no. Not this. Not the last thing she'll ever ask of me. We stood in silence, the weight of his words settling over us. I thought about my own mother, the promises I'd made at her bedside, the lengths I would go to honor her memory. Okay, I said finally. Okay, I understand, and I'm not backing out. I crossed my arms, but we need to renegotiate terms. Dongwoo raised an eyebrow. What kind of terms? If I'm going to be in danger, I need to know what's going on. No more respectful distance from your business operations. If something is going to get me killed, I want to see it coming. That's not. I also want self-defense training, real training, not just a gym membership. And I want access to your security team. If I'm supposed to be your fiancée, I should know the people protecting me. Dongwoo stared at me like he'd never seen me before. You're negotiating, he said slowly. I'm a nurse. We're underpaid and overworked. You learn to negotiate or you get walked all over. I lifted my chin. Those are my terms. Take them or leave them. For a moment, I thought he'd refuse. Tell me to stick to the original contract or leave. Instead, he laughed. A real laugh, not the sardonic chuckle I'd heard before. It transformed his face, made him look younger and less guarded. You're incredible, he said, shaking his head. Absolutely incredible. Is that a yes? It's a yes. He extended his hand. New terms accepted. But Tessa, his grip tightened on my hand. Once you know what I really am, once you see what this family really does, you can't unknow it. You can't unsee it. Are you sure you want that? I thought about all the things I'd already seen. The blood, the lies, the fear in his eyes when he'd come to my room that night 3 months from now. The night he'd tell me about the price on my head. I'm sure, I said, and I meant it. What I didn't know then was how much that choice would cost me. The weeks that followed were an education in everything I'd never wanted to learn. Dongwoo kept his promise. Every morning, I trained with his head of security, a terrifying woman named Kim Yoonji, who looked like a K-pop idol and fought like she'd been raised by assassins. She taught me how to break a chokehold, how to use everyday objects as weapons, how to recognize the signs that someone was about to attack. You're not trying to win a fight, Yoonji told me as I lay on the mat, gasping for breath after she'd flipped me for the 10th time. You're trying to survive long enough to run. Always run if you can. Only fight if you can't. What if I can't run? Her smile was cold. Then you make them regret touching you. In the afternoons, Dongwoo himself would take me through the family's operations. Not the illegal parts, not yet, but the legitimate businesses that formed the public face of the Lim Empire. A shipping company, a chain of hotels, a construction firm that had built half the new developments along Busan's coastline. My father's dream, Dongwoo said as we toured a waterfront property being developed into luxury condominiums. He wanted to take us fully legitimate within a generation. Clean money, respectable business. His jaw tightened. He was 3 years into the transition when the Zhang family decided he'd become too weak to protect what was his. The Zhang family, I repeated. The ones who tortured you. The same. They've been our rivals for 60 years. My grandfather fought wars with them. My father tried to make peace. Dongwoo's expression darkened. I've learned there's no peace to be had with people like them. Only temporary truces. What do they want? What everyone wants. Power, territory, control. He turned to face me, the wind from the ocean ruffling his hair. Busan is a port city. Do you know what that means for organizations like ours? Smuggling. Among other things, whoever controls the port controls what comes in and goes out. Drugs, weapons, people. He saw my expression and shook his head. Not us. Not anymore. My father ended our involvement in human trafficking before I was born, and I've maintained that policy. But the Zhangs, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. So they tortured you because I interrupted a shipment of theirs 6 months ago. 43 girls, most of them teenagers, being shipped to buyers in Japan. His voice was hard. My people intercepted the ship and returned the girls to their families. The Zhangs lost millions and a great deal of face. I stared at him, trying to reconcile this information with everything I thought I knew about organized crime. You saved them. Don't make me into a hero, Tessa. I'm not one. Dongwoo's eyes met mine. I did it because it was the right thing to do, yes. But also because it weakened the Zhangs. Because it sent a message about who controls Busan. There's no such thing as a purely good deed in my world. That doesn't make the deed less good. No, he agreed, but it doesn't make me less of a monster either. I was starting to realize that Dongwoo saw himself through a lens I couldn't understand. He'd grown up surrounded by violence and betrayal. He'd been taught that love was weakness and mercy was death. And yet, somewhere inside him, there was still a man who would risk war to save 43 girls he'd never met. You're not a monster, I said. You don't know what I've done. Then tell me. He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the ocean. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, like he was reciting someone else's history. I killed my first man when I was 16 years old. He was one of my father's lieutenants, a man who'd watched me grow up, who'd taught me to play cards when I was a child. He'd been selling information to the Zhangs for years. When we discovered his betrayal, my grandmother put a gun in my hand and told me to prove I was worthy of leading this family. My stomach churned, but I kept my voice steady. Did you? I shot him in the head while he begged for mercy. And then I ate dinner with my grandmother like nothing had happened. Dongwoo finally turned to look at me, and I saw the self-loathing in his eyes. I was 16 years old, Tessa, and I felt nothing. Nothing at all. Maybe that's because you'd already been taught to turn off your feelings. Maybe that's survival, not monstrousness. Or maybe I was just born broken. I don't believe that. Why not? Because broken people don't save 43 girls from traffickers. Broken people don't care about disappointing their grandmothers. Broken people don't. I stopped myself before I could finish the sentence. Broken people don't look at me the way you do when you think I'm not watching. But I didn't say that. It wasn't part of our arrangement. We should go, Dongwoo said, something shifting in his expression. My grandmother wants to have tea with you this afternoon. She's been asking questions about your family. My family. Your history. Your ancestors. He almost smiled. She's traditional. She wants to know what kind of blood will be mixing with the Lim line. My blood is mostly Mississippi cotton pickers and Chicago factory workers. I don't think it's going to impress her. You might be surprised. Dongwoo's hand brushed against mine as we walked back to the car, casual like it was nothing. But I felt the touch like a brand. My grandmother has more respect for people who built themselves from nothing than for the heirs of ancient fortunes. That's unexpectedly enlightened. She's full of surprises. His fingers intertwined with mine. And this time it wasn't an accident. You should know that by now. I should have pulled away. The touching, the hand-holding, it was supposed to be for show, for when other people were watching. There was no one here but us and the driver. But I didn't pull away, and neither did he. The tea with grandmother Haesuk became a regular occurrence. Every afternoon at 3, I would make my way to her room, where she would be waiting with a pot of tea and a seemingly endless supply of pointed questions. At first, I thought she was testing me, trying to catch me in a lie, to prove I wasn't worthy of her grandson. But as the weeks passed, I realized it was something else entirely. She was lonely. For all the family members who lived in the house, for all the staff who attended to her every need, Haesuk was profoundly isolated. Her husband had died decades ago. Her only son, Dongwoo's father, had been murdered. Her body was failing, trapping her in a room she could barely leave. And the people around her either wanted something from her or were afraid of her. But I wasn't afraid. And I didn't want anything except to fulfill my contract and go home. Maybe that's why she started to actually talk to me. I was 17 when I married my husband, she said one afternoon, her gnarled hands wrapped around a delicate teacup. It was arranged, of course. I'd never even seen his face before the wedding day. Were you scared? Terrified. A ghost of a smile crossed her weathered features. He was 23 years older than me and the most powerful man in Busan. I thought he would be cold, cruel. I thought I would spend my life being ornamental and obedient. But he was kind. Her eyes grew distant, looking at something I couldn't see. He brought me flowers every morning. He asked my opinion on business matters. He told me I was beautiful even when I was old and gray and bent. She set down her teacup with shaking hands. I loved him for 47 years. When he died, I wanted to die too. But you didn't. No, because I still had work to do. Her gaze sharpened, focusing on me. My son was too soft, too idealistic. I knew the wolves would tear him apart eventually. I just didn't know when. And I was right. The pain in her voice was ancient and raw. But my grandson, my Dongwoo, he's strong, I said quietly. Stronger than anyone I've ever met. He is, but strength isn't enough. Haesuk reached out and gripped my hand with surprising force. He needs someone to remind him that strength means nothing without something worth protecting. He needs someone to love him not despite what he is, but because of it. Do you understand? I didn't know how to respond. This felt like more than a conversation. It felt like a charge, a responsibility. I understand, I said, though I wasn't sure I did. Good. She released my hand and settled back against her cushions. Now tell me about your brother, the one you worked so hard to put through school. I talked about Darius, about his brilliance, his stubbornness, his terrible taste in girlfriends. I told her about my mother's sacrifice and my father's abandonment, about the Chicago winters and the cramped apartments and the way my grandmother used to sing while she cooked. And somewhere in the telling, I forgot that I was supposed to be pretending. It was exactly 6 weeks into my time in Busan when everything started to fall apart. I'd settled into something that almost felt like a routine. Mornings with Yunji, learning how to hurt people. Afternoons with Haesuk, learning how to love them. Evenings with Dongwoo, walking the grounds, talking about everything and nothing. Our hands occasionally brushing in ways that made my heart race. We hadn't kissed. We hadn't done anything that would constitute crossing the line from fake relationship to real one. But the line was getting blurrier by the day. And then I woke up one morning and couldn't stop vomiting. At first, I thought it was food poisoning. Then I thought it was a stomach bug. But when the nausea continued for 3 days straight, appearing every morning like clockwork and disappearing by noon, I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. I sent Yuna to a pharmacy in town with a carefully worded request. And when she returned with a bag containing 3 different pregnancy tests, I locked myself in my bathroom and stared at the results with growing horror. Positive. All 3 of them. I sank to the floor, my back against the cold tile, and tried to understand how this had happened. We hadn't had sex. We'd barely touched beyond the casual intimacy required to maintain our cover. There was no way. And then I remembered. 3 weeks ago, the night of the memorial service for Dongwoo's father, marking the anniversary of his death. Dongwoo had been drinking, really drinking, not the controlled sips he usually allowed himself at family events. I'd found him alone in the garden after midnight, staring at the pond with empty eyes. "I miss him," he'd said when I sat down beside him. "After all these years, I still miss him." Is that pathetic? It's human. I'm not sure I remember how to be human. I'd taken his hand, meaning to comfort him. He'd turned to look at me, and something in his expression had shifted. "Tessa." And then he'd kissed me. It wasn't like in the movies. It wasn't romantic or gentle or sweet. It was desperate, hungry, like he was drowning and I was the only air. I should have stopped him. I should have remembered the contract, the arrangement, all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. But I didn't stop him, and he didn't stop either. We didn't talk about it afterward. We both pretended it hadn't happened, resuming our careful distance like nothing had changed. I'd told myself it was a one-time mistake, that it didn't mean anything, that the contract was still intact. But the contract had a clause. The clause about children. Any child conceived during the contract period will be considered the property and responsibility of the Lim family. I was pregnant with the heir to a criminal empire, and according to the document I had signed, I had no rights to my own child. I sat on that bathroom floor for a long time, the positive tests clutched in my shaking hands, trying to figure out what to do. I could tell Dongwoo. He deserved to know. And despite everything, despite the contract and the complications and my own terror, I trusted him. Whatever else he wasn't a man who would force me to do something against my will. But was I sure? Could I really be sure? I'd known him for 6 weeks. I'd slept with him once. I'd signed a contract that treated potential children like property. What kind of man wrote a clause like that? A knock on the bathroom door made me jump. "Tessa." Dongwoo's voice, muffled by the wood. "Yuna said you weren't feeling well. Can I come in?" "Just a minute." I scrambled to hide the tests, shoving them into the cabinet under the sink. Then I splashed water on my face, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Dongwoo stood in the doorway, his brow furrowed with concern. He was dressed casually today, jeans and a soft gray sweater that made him look almost normal. Almost like someone who hadn't killed a man at 16. "You look pale," he said. "Should I call a doctor?" "I'm fine. Just a stomach bug." His eyes searched my face, and I had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through me. "You're lying," he said quietly. "You've been off for days. What's really going on?" I should have told him. Right there, right then. I should have opened my mouth and said the words that would change everything. But I was afraid. So I did what I always do when I'm afraid. I deflected. "I'm just tired," I said, pushing past him into the bedroom. "The training with Yoonji, the afternoons with your grandmother, all the family drama. It's a lot to handle. If it's too much, we can." "I'm fine," I repeated more firmly. "I just need some rest. Can you tell your grandmother I won't make tea today?" Dongwoo studied me for another long moment. I could see the questions forming behind his eyes, the suspicions taking shape. But he didn't push. "Of course," he said. "Rest. I'll check on you later." After he left, I collapsed on the bed and stared at the ceiling, one hand pressed against my still flat stomach. I had a decision to make, and I had no idea what the right choice was. I kept my secret for exactly 5 days. On the 6th day, I walked into the kitchen at dawn, desperate for something to settle my stomach, and found Dongwoo's cousin Sujin sitting at the counter with a cup of coffee and a knowing smile. "So," she said cheerfully, "when are you going to tell him?" I froze mid-step. "Tell him what?" "That you're pregnant." Sujin took a sip of her coffee, watching me over the rim. "I'm not stupid, Tessa. You've been nauseous every morning for almost a week. You've suddenly stopped drinking alcohol at dinner. And yesterday you nearly threw up when Uncle mentioned his wife's fish stew. She set down her cup. I'm a woman too. I know the signs. My first instinct was to deny it. My second was to run. But Sujin's expression wasn't hostile or calculating, just curious, with an undercurrent of something that might have been sympathy. How long have you known? I asked, sinking onto a stool across from her. Since day 3. I was waiting to see if you'd figure out how to handle it yourself. She tilted her head. You haven't told Dongwoo. No. Why not? Because I don't know what he'll do. Sujin laughed, a surprised, genuine sound. You're afraid of Dongwoo? I'm afraid of what he might become if he thinks he has to protect an heir. I met her eyes. I've read the contract. I know what it says about children. The amusement faded from Sujin's face. That clause. You know about it? I know it was written by lawyers who don't understand human beings. I know it was meant to protect Dongwoo from gold diggers, not to strip rights from someone he actually cares about. She leaned forward. Tessa, that contract was written before he met you, before he knew what kind of person you were. If you think he'd actually enforce the clause against you, I don't know what he'd do. That's the problem. I pressed my hands against my eyes, trying to push back the tears that had been threatening all week. I've known him for 6 weeks. I've seen him be kind and gentle and surprisingly funny, but I've also heard him talk about killing a man like it was nothing. I've seen how his own family fears him. I dropped my hands. How am I supposed to know which version is real? Both of them, Sujin said quietly. That's the truth no one wants to admit. Dongwoo is kind and he's ruthless. He's gentle and he's violent. He's everything his family made him, and he's fighting every day to be something else. She paused. He's been fighting that battle alone for a long time. Maybe that's why he's losing. And you think telling him about the baby will help? I think lying to him about it will make everything worse. Sujin stood, gathering her coffee cup. But it's your choice, Tessa. All I'll say is this. If you wait too long, someone else is going to figure it out. And not everyone in this house wants to see Dongwoo happy. She left me alone in the kitchen with her words echoing in my ears. Not everyone in this house wants to see Dongwoo happy. I thought about his Uncle Jae-sung with his scheming eyes, about his Aunt Mina, who'd been pushing her eldest son toward power since before I arrived, about all the cousins and hangers-on who would see a new heir as either an opportunity or a threat. Sujin was right. I couldn't keep this secret forever. The only question was whether I told Dongwoo before someone else did. I found him in his office that afternoon, surrounded by papers and looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. He glanced up when I entered, and some of the tension in his shoulders eased. Tessa, I wasn't expecting you. We need to talk. Something in my voice must have alerted him, because he immediately set down his pen and gave me his full attention. What's wrong? I closed the door behind me and walked to the chairs facing his desk, but I didn't sit. I wasn't sure I could say what I needed to say while sitting. Before I tell you, I said, I need to know something. Anything. The contract we signed. The clause about children. I watched his face carefully. Did you write that? Dongwoo's expression flickered. Confusion, then dawning realization, then something that looked almost like fear. Tessa, what are you? Did you write it? No. The word came out hard, emphatic. My lawyers wrote it. It's standard language for this kind of arrangement in my world. It's meant to protect against. I know what it's meant to do. I gripped the back of the chair, my knuckles turning white. What I need to know is whether you'd enforce it. Enforce it how? If I were pregnant, if I had your child, would you use that clause to take my baby away from me? The silence that followed was deafening. Dongwoo rose slowly from his desk, his eyes locked on mine. "You're pregnant," he said. It wasn't a question. "Answer my question first." "No." He moved around the desk toward me, his steps measured, his expression unreadable. "No, Tessa. I would never take a child away from its mother. I would never use a piece of paper to." He stopped an arm's length away. "Is that really what you think of me?" "I think I don't know you well enough to know what you're capable of. I think I signed a document that treats my potential children like property. I think your own family talks about you like you're either a god or a monster." My voice broke. "I think I'm terrified and I don't know what to do." Dongwoo moved so quickly I barely saw him. One moment, he was standing an arm's length away. The next, he was holding me, his arms wrapped tight around me like he was trying to keep me from flying apart. "I'm sorry," he murmured into my hair. "I'm sorry for the contract. I'm sorry for every reason you have to be afraid of me. But I need you to hear me right now." He pulled back just enough to look at my face. "I would burn that contract and everything it represents before I would use it to hurt you. You are not a transaction. You're not an asset. You are," he stopped himself, something raw flickering in his eyes. "You're everything I didn't know I was looking for." I wanted to believe him. Every part of me wanted to believe him. "The baby," I started. "Is ours," he interrupted. "Not the Lim family's. Not property. Ours." His hand moved to my stomach, resting there with a gentleness that made my chest ache. "If you want to keep it, we'll keep it. If you don't, I'll support whatever choice you make. But I need you to understand something." "What?" "I've wanted a family my entire life. A real family, not the power-hungry nest of vipers I was born into. I've wanted someone to love me for who I am, not for what I can give them. I've wanted," he exhaled shakily, "I've wanted you since the moment you insulted my bodyguard in that emergency room. I've been trying not to want you because it wasn't fair to you, because you didn't sign up for this to be real. But it's too late. It's been too late for weeks." I looked up at the man I'd agreed to pretend to love for money. The man who'd held my hair back while I vomited. The man who'd killed at 16 and saved 43 girls from traffickers. The man who was looking at me now like I was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. "I love you," I said. The words came out before I could stop them, before I could think about whether they were wise or appropriate or part of any plan. Dongwoo's breath caught. For a moment, he just stared at me, like he couldn't quite believe what he'd heard. "Say it again," he whispered. "I love you." This time, the words came easier. I don't know when it happened. I don't know how. But I love you, Lim Dongwoo. All of you. The kind parts and the ruthless parts. The man who brings me tea and the man who runs an empire. I love you. He kissed me then, not like that desperate, hungry kiss in the garden, but something slower, deeper. A promise rather than an escape. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard, he pressed his forehead against mine. "I love you too," he said. "I should have told you weeks ago. I should have told you the moment I realized it was true." "When was that?" "The first day. When you told my grandmother about holding your mother's hand while she died." His thumb traced my cheekbone. "You looked so fierce and so sad and so absolutely yourself. I knew right then that I was in trouble." I laughed, though it came out watery with tears. I hadn't realized I was crying. "We're quite a pair." "We are." He pulled back slightly, his hand still cupping my face. "Tessa, about the baby. I want to keep it." The smile that spread across his face was brighter than anything I'd seen from him before. Yeah. I put my hands over his. "I'm scared out of my mind. I have no idea how we're going to make this work. But I want this baby. I want us. I want to try." "Then we'll try." He pulled me close again. "We'll figure it out together. The contract, the family, all of it. We'll renegotiate every single term until it's something we both can live with. Even the property clause?" "Especially the property clause." His voice hardened. That document was never meant for you. It was meant for hypothetical strangers who might try to exploit me. You're neither of those things. For the first time in days, I felt something loosen in my chest. Hope, maybe. Or just the simple relief of not carrying this weight alone. We should tell your grandmother, I said. Dongwoo's expression softened with something that might have been grief. Yes, we should tell her soon. While she can still. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Let's go now, I said, taking his hand. Let's tell her now. Grandmother Haesuk's reaction to our news was not what I expected. I'd braced myself for questions about the timing, for concerns about my health, about the family bloodline, about 100 traditional considerations I probably hadn't even thought of. Instead, she cried, silent tears streaming down her weathered cheeks as she reached up to touch my face. Then Dongwoo's, her hands trembling with emotion and age. I prayed for this, she said, her voice rough. Every day for 20 years I prayed. Not for the family, not for the business, for him. She looked at Dongwoo with eyes full of a love that had survived decades of difficulty. For someone to love him the way he deserves to be loved. Grandmother, Dongwoo's voice cracked. Hush. She waved her hand imperiously, though the effect was somewhat diminished by her continued crying. Let an old woman be sentimental. I've earned it. She insisted we stay for tea, though it quickly became clear that she was more interested in planning than celebrating. Names were discussed. She had very strong opinions about family names. Nursery arrangements were considered. There was apparently a traditional room in the East Wing that had been used for Lim children for generations. Wedding dates were mentioned with pointed casualness. Grandmother, Dongwoo said gently, we haven't discussed marriage yet. Then you should discuss it. Her sharp eyes fixed on me. You're carrying a Lim heir. You should be a Lim yourself. With respect, I said, I'd rather be with your grandson because I love him than because of a legal document. I've signed one contract with this family. I'm not eager to sign another. For a moment, I worried I'd gone too far. But Haesuk surprised me again. Good, she said. A woman who can't be bought is worth more than all the gold in Korea. She turned to Dongwoo. Keep this one. She has backbone. I intend to, grandmother. We left her room an hour later. Both of us emotionally wrung out, but somehow lighter than before. That went better than expected, I said as we walked back to our wing of the house. She's been waiting for this for a long time. Dongwoo's hand was warm in mine. I think she was starting to lose hope. Has she always been so intense? She's a Lim. The corner of his mouth quirked. We're all intense. It's a family trait. I've noticed. We were passing through the main hall when a voice stopped us cold. Nephew. Jae-sung stepped out of the shadows near the doorway, his face carefully neutral, but his eyes sharp with calculation. Uncle. Dongwoo's voice had gone flat, all the warmth from our conversation with Haesuk draining away. I didn't realize you were home. I just returned from Daegu. Business matters. Jae-sung's gaze flicked to our joined hands, then to my face. I see congratulations are in order. I felt Dongwoo stiffen beside me. What do you mean? Come now. Jae-sung's smile was thin as a blade. The whole house knows. Mrs. Han saw the young lady's assistant purchasing pregnancy tests last week. The staff had been whispering about morning sickness for days. He spread his hands in a gesture of false innocence. I merely wished to offer my well wishes. Your well wishes are noted, Dongwoo said coldly. Now, if you'll excuse us. Of course. Jae-sung stepped aside, but as we passed, he added, I do hope you've considered the implications carefully. An heir changes everything. The family will have expectations. The family can expect whatever they like, Dongwoo said without turning around. My child is none of their concern. We walked away without looking back. but I could feel Jae-sung's eyes boring into us until we turned the corner. That was a threat, I said once we were out of earshot. Yes. What's he going to do? Dongwoo's jaw tightened. I don't know yet, but I intend to find out. The next few weeks were a strange mixture of joy and paranoia. On one hand, I was happier than I'd ever been. Dongwoo was attentive and loving in ways that continually surprised me. He brought me ginger candies when my morning sickness flared. He fell asleep with his hand on my stomach, murmuring to the baby in Korean. He looked at me sometimes with an expression of such wonder that it made my heart ache. On the other hand, something was wrong. I could feel it in the way the staff whispered when I passed. In the way Jae-sung's wife Mina watched me at dinner with barely concealed hostility. In the increasing number of business trips that pulled Dongwoo away from the estate, sometimes for days at a time. What's happening? I finally demanded one night when he came home late, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. And don't tell me it's nothing. I'm not stupid. Dongwoo sank onto the bed beside me, running his hands through his hair. For a long moment, he didn't speak. The Jong family knows about the pregnancy, he said finally. My blood turned to ice. How? I don't know. Someone in this house is feeding them information. Someone close enough to know what the staff knows. His voice was bitter. We have a traitor, Tessa. Someone who's been selling us out for God knows how long. Your uncle. Maybe. Or someone working for him. Or someone else entirely. He looked at me, and I saw fear in his eyes, real fear, the kind I'd only seen once before, that night in my bedroom when he'd told me about the price on my head. I've been trying to find them, quietly, without alerting them that we know. But they're careful, and I'm running out of time. Running out of time for what? The Jongs have approached my uncle with an offer, an alliance. If he helps them take control of Busan, they'll let him run the Lim operations as their puppet. Dongwoo's hands clenched into fists. Jae-sung hasn't agreed yet. He's still weighing his options. But if he decides the Jongs are the winning side. Civil war, I said. In your own family. In my own house. His voice was raw. And you and the baby will be caught in the middle. I thought about everything I'd learned in the past 2 months. About loyalty and betrayal. About the thin line between family and enemy. About the world Dongwoo had been born into and had never had a choice about. What do we do? I asked. I've been trying to protect you by keeping you away from all of this, but that's not working. He turned to face me fully. You were right back at the beginning. You need to know what's going on. You need to be able to see threats coming. What are you saying? I'm saying that tomorrow I'm going to show you everything. The real family business. The operations my uncle wants to take over. The reason the Jongs are willing to go to war. His dark eyes were serious. I'm saying that if you still love me after you see what I really am, what this family really does, then we'll face whatever comes next together. I reached out and took his hand. I already know what you are. You know parts. You don't know everything. Then show me everything. I squeezed his fingers. I'm not going anywhere, Dongwoo. I told you I love all of you. Let me prove it. The next morning, Dongwoo took me into the city. Not to the gleaming waterfront developments or the legitimate business offices I'd seen before. This time, we went to the old part of Busan. Narrow streets packed with shops and restaurants and buildings that had stood for generations. Our first stop was a fish market near the port. This is ours, I asked, looking at the bustling stalls selling everything from fresh mackerel to live octopus. This is where it starts. Dongwoo led me through the crowd, nodding to vendors who bowed deeply as we passed. Every stall here pays us a percentage. In exchange, we provide security. Make sure no one bothers them. Handle disputes before they become problems. Protection money. Some would call it that. He stopped at a stall run by an elderly woman who beamed when she saw him. How meany, this is Tessa, my fiancée. The old woman grabbed my hands, her grip surprisingly strong, and unleashed a torrent of Korean that I couldn't follow. Dongwoo translated, smiling. She says you have good hips for bearing children, and that your eyes are kind. He paused. She also says you should eat more. She thinks you're too thin. She sounds like my grandmother. We left the fish market with a bag of snacks the old woman had insisted we take, and Dongwoo continued my education. The gambling parlors in the basement of an unassuming tea house. The loan offices that served people the banks wouldn't touch. The network of informants who kept Dongwoo apprised of everything happening in his territory. This is what my uncle wants, Dongwoo said as we sat in a small private room above a noodle shop, looking out at the street below. Not just the money, though that's substantial. The power, the ability to make things happen with a word. The knowledge that everyone in this city knows your name and fears it. And the Jongs, they want Busan as a gateway. Control the port, control what comes in and out of Korea. They're based in Seoul, but Busan is the key to expanding their operations. His jaw tightened. If they take over, the first thing they'll do is reopen the trafficking routes my father shut down. Women, children, anyone who can be sold. I felt sick, and your uncle would let them. My uncle doesn't care about the people. He cares about power. If helping the Jongs traffic innocent people is the price of sitting at the top of the food chain, he'll pay it gladly. Then we have to stop him. Dongwoo looked at me with something like surprise. I told you I wasn't going anywhere. I met his eyes steadily. If this is your world, it's my world now too. And I refuse to let people like your uncle and the Jongs hurt innocent people while I stand by and do nothing. Tessa, you're pregnant. You shouldn't be. I'm pregnant, not helpless. And I was a trauma nurse for 6 years. I've seen more violence and suffering than most people can imagine. I leaned forward. Use me, Dongwoo. Let me help. For a long moment, he just looked at me. Then, slowly, he smiled. I've been trying to figure out who the traitor is for weeks, he said. Maybe I've been going about it wrong. What do you mean? I've been looking for someone who's been meeting with the Jongs. Someone who's been passing information. But traitors don't always communicate directly. His eyes sharpened with thought. They use intermediaries, dead drops, people who don't even know they're being used. Like the staff. Like the vendors at the market, like anyone who passes through the estate regularly. He stood, energy suddenly coursing through him. Tessa, you've been having tea with my grandmother every afternoon. You've met most of the household. Have you noticed anything unusual? Anyone acting strange? Any patterns that didn't make sense? I thought back over the past weeks. The whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. The way certain servants seemed nervous around others. The odd detail that had been nagging at the back of my mind since my first week. Mrs. Han, I said slowly. The housekeeper. Dongwoo went very still. What about her? She has a sister. She mentioned it once during one of my conversations with your grandmother. Her sister lives in Seoul and works for. I trailed off, the pieces clicking together. She works for a shipping company. A company she said was very successful and growing fast. Seoul-based shipping. Dongwoo's voice was deadly quiet. That's a Jong front. It might be nothing, a coincidence, or it might be everything. He pulled out his phone, firing off rapid texts. I need to look into this. Discreetly. If Mrs. Han is the traitor, or even if she's an unwitting conduit, we need to be certain before we act. What happens if she is? Dongwoo's expression was hard. Then we find out everything she's told them, and we use it against them. It took 3 days to confirm our suspicions. Mrs. Han wasn't the traitor herself. She was too loyal to the family, too devoted to grandmother Haesuk. But her sister was a different story. Every week, Mrs. Han called her sister to catch up on family news. Innocent conversations about health and children and daily life. Except her sister had been taking notes, recording the calls, passing every detail to her employers, who passed it up the chain to the Jong family. She didn't know, Dongwoo said, his face gray with exhaustion after a long night of intelligence gathering. Mrs. Han had no idea her sister was using her. When my people told her, He stopped, swallowing hard. She tried to kill herself. Yoonji stopped her just in time. Oh God. She's under medical supervision now. She'll recover. But the guilt. He shook his head. She served this family for 40 years, and she's been betraying us without ever knowing it. I sat down heavily, one hand pressed against my growing belly. At 12 weeks, I was finally starting to show a small bump that was becoming harder to hide. What happens now? Now we use it. Dongwoo's eyes were cold in a way I'd never seen before. The Johns think they have perfect intelligence on this household. They think they know every move we make. We're going to let them think that while feeding them exactly the information we want them to have. Disinformation. Warfare. He knelt in front of me, taking my hands. Tessa, things are going to move fast now. I need you to trust me, even when I can't explain what I'm doing. Can you do that? I looked at his face, the face I'd grown to love, with all its sharp edges and hidden softness. Yes. Good. Because I'm about to do something that's going to look like betrayal. And I need you to know that whatever happens, whatever it looks like, I'm doing it for us. For you and the baby. What are you going to do? He leaned forward and kissed me softly. I'm going to let my uncle think he's won. The next week was the hardest of my life. Dongwoo pulled away from me. Publicly, dramatically. He stopped coming to meals. He stopped sleeping in our room. When we crossed paths in the hallway, he barely looked at me. The household buzzed with gossip. The servants whispered that he'd grown tired of his American mistress. Jae-sung's wife Mina smiled like a cat who'd cornered a mouse. Even grandmother Haesuk seemed confused, though she was too ill now to demand explanations. Only Soo-jin knew the truth. She came to my room one night, slipping in through the servants' entrance, to squeeze my hand and whisper that everything was going according to plan. He's meeting with Jae-sung tomorrow, she said, pretending to negotiate, making it look like he's willing to step aside for the sake of family unity. And Jae-sung is buying it. Jae-sung wants to believe it. He's always thought Dongwoo was soft, too much like his father. Soo-jin's expression was grim. He's about to find out how wrong he is. I waited. I played my part, the abandoned fiancée, heartbroken and alone. I let Mina gloat over me at dinner. I let the servants treat me like I was already leaving. And I gathered information, because Dongwoo had given me one task in all of this. Watch. Listen. Find out who else was working with Jae-sung. The answer came on the 8th day, from the most unexpected source. I was in the garden, pretending to read while actually observing the comings and goings from the main house, when one of Jae-sung's sons approached me. Lim Hyunwoo was the middle child, quiet, forgettable, always in the shadow of his older brother. I had barely spoken to him since my arrival. Miss Collins, he said, sitting down on the bench beside me. We haven't had a chance to talk. No, we haven't. I wanted to say. He hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. I'm sorry for what's happening. With my cousin. With everything. I studied his face, looking for the calculation I'd grown used to seeing in the Lim family. But all I saw was genuine discomfort. Thank you, I said carefully. I also wanted to warn you. His voice dropped even lower. My father is planning something. Something big. I don't know the details, but... He looked at me with fear in his eyes. You should leave. Tonight, if you can. Take the baby and go back to America. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm not like my father. I don't want... He stopped abruptly, his face going pale. I followed his gaze and saw Jae-sung standing on the terrace, watching us with cold fury. Hyun-woo stood quickly. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. Please forget. Hyun-woo. Jae-sung's voice carried across the garden like a whip. Come here. Now. I watched the young man walk toward his father, his shoulders hunched with fear, and I made a decision. Tonight. Whatever was going to happen, it was happening tonight. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to Dongwoo. Asterisk, your uncle is moving. Tonight. And his son is having second thoughts. Asterisk. The response came 30 seconds later. Asterisk, I know. Stay in your room. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. Asterisk. I did as he asked. I went to my room, locked the door, and waited in the darkness for whatever was coming. At midnight, I heard the first gunshot. I don't know how long the fighting lasted. Minutes? Hours? From my locked room, I could hear shouting, running feet, the occasional crack of gunfire. I huddled in the corner with my hands over my belly, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in. Please let him survive. Please let us both survive. Please let our child have a chance to be born. When the knock finally came, I nearly screamed. Tessa, it's me. Open the door. I scrambled to my feet and threw open the lock. Dongwoo stood in the hallway, his face spattered with blood, his breathing ragged. But he was alive. He was alive. It's over, he said, and collapsed into my arms. I caught him, staggering under his weight, and somehow got him to the bed. His wounds weren't severe. A gash on his arm, bruises on his face, but he was exhausted, depleted in a way that went beyond physical. What happened? I asked as I cleaned and bandaged his injuries with supplies I'd kept in my room since the beginning. Jae-sung made his move. He thought I was weak, distracted, ready to give up. Dongwoo's laugh was hollow. He didn't know that I'd been feeding him false information for a week, that the security weakness he thought he'd found was actually an ambush. Is he dead? The word fell like a stone. He drew on me, left me no choice. Dongwoo closed his eyes. His wife fled with her children. I've let them go. Hyun-woo too. Hyun-woo especially. You were right about him. He tried to warn his father at the last minute, tried to get him to stand down. Jae-sung shot him for it. Dongwoo's voice was heavy. The boy will live, but he'll never forgive his father. Or himself. I sat beside him on the bed, my hands still shaking. And the Jongs? They'll get the message. Their ally is dead, their intelligence pipeline is compromised, and any move on Busan will be met with force. His eyes opened, finding mine. It's not over. It won't be over for a long time. But for now, we're safe. For now, I repeated. For now. He reached up and touched my face, his fingers gentle despite everything. I'm sorry. I'm sorry you had to be part of this. Sorry I couldn't find another way. Don't be sorry. I turned my head and kissed his palm. You did what you had to do. You protected your family. You're my family now. You and the baby. His hand moved to my stomach, resting over the bump that had grown larger in the weeks of pretending. Everything I did tonight, I did for you. We lay there together as the sun rose, the sounds of activity in the house gradually subsiding as order was restored. I didn't sleep, I couldn't, but being in his arms was enough. Knowing we'd both survived was enough. Tessa, Dongwoo murmured, half asleep. Yes. Marry me. I lifted my head to look at him. His eyes were open, serious despite his exhaustion. Marry me, he repeated. Not because of the contract or the baby or because my grandmother wants it. Marry me because I love you, because I can't imagine spending the rest of my life with anyone else. Because you're the first person who's ever made me believe I could be more than what I was born to be. I thought about everything that had happened. The contract I'd signed out of desperation. The family I'd stumbled into. The violence I'd witnessed. The love I'd found in the most unlikely place imaginable. Ask me again in a year, I said. His face fell slightly. A year. I want to know who we are when things are calm, when we're not in crisis mode, when we've had time to actually build a life instead of just survive. I kissed him softly. I love you. I want to be with you. But I want to marry you because I choose to, not because we're both high on adrenaline and relief. A slow smile spread across his face. That's fair. I'm always fair. You're stubborn, is what you are. He pulled me closer, tucking my head under his chin. 1 year. I'll ask you again in 1 year. And I'll probably say yes. Probably. Definitely. I smiled against his chest. But let's not tell your grandmother that. Let her keep hoping. His laugh rumbled through me, warm and real. Deal. The next 3 months were about healing, in every sense of the word. Grandmother Haesuk rallied after the night of violence, as if the resolution of the family conflict had given her a reason to keep fighting. Her doctors were baffled by her improvement. I wasn't. I'd seen stubborn old women before. They tended to die on their own schedules, not anyone else's. The estate slowly returned to normal, though the shadows of what had happened lingered in corners and silences. Mina and her surviving children had fled to Japan. Hyunwoo, against all expectations, had asked to stay. I don't want to be like my father, he told Dongwoo in a conversation I overheard. I want to learn how to be something else. Dongwoo, to his credit, gave him that chance. As for me, I grew larger by the day. My pregnancy progressed without complications, though Dr. Kim, the OB/GYN Dongwoo had brought in from Seoul, clucked her tongue at my blood pressure and made me promise to rest more. You've had too much stress, she said during one of my checkups. It's not good for the baby. I'm trying, I said. Try harder. She handed me a list of foods to eat and activities to avoid. And tell that handsome fiancé of yours to stop bringing you into crisis situations. I don't think he has much choice. There's always a choice. She fixed me with a knowing look. The question is whether you're willing to make the hard ones. I thought about that conversation a lot in the weeks that followed. The hard choices, the ones that required sacrifice, compromise, change. Because as much as I loved Dongwoo, and I did, more than I'd ever loved anyone, I was starting to realize that loving someone wasn't the same as losing yourself in them. It was Soo-jin who finally said what I'd been thinking. We were in the garden, enjoying one of the last warm days before winter set in. My belly was enormous now, 7 months along and showing no signs of slowing down. Dr. Kim had started making noises about bed rest. You're not happy, Soo-jin said, passing me a cup of tea. I am happy. You're happy with Dongwoo. You're happy about the baby. She tilted her head, studying me with those sharp eyes. But you're not happy with your life. I opened my mouth to deny it, then closed it again. Soo-jin wasn't someone you could lie to successfully. I miss working, I admitted. I miss being useful in my own way. I miss having something that was mine. Have you told him? He has enough to worry about. Tessa. Soo-jin's voice was gentle but firm. He loves you. He wants you to be happy. But he's not a mind reader. If you don't tell him what you need, he can't give it to you. What if what I need is something he can't give? Then you figure out a compromise. Or you figure out that you want different things and go your separate ways. She shrugged. But you don't sit in silence and let resentment build until it poisons everything. I stared at my tea, watching the leaves swirl in the amber liquid. When did you get so wise? I've watched my family destroy themselves with unspoken grievances for my entire life. I've learned a few things about what not to do. She squeezed my hand. Talk to him, Tessa. Tonight. I found Dongwoo in his office that evening, poring over reports from the legitimate side of the business. He looked up when I entered, and his face immediately softened into the smile he reserved just for me. Hey, he said, pushing back from his desk. How are you feeling? Pregnant, I said, settling into the chair across from him. which is how I've been feeling for 7 months now. Fair point. He came around the desk to perch on the edge, close enough to take my hand. What's wrong? What makes you think something's wrong? You have your serious face on, the one you wear when you're about to tell me something I might not want to hear. I laughed despite myself. You know me too well. Not possible. He squeezed my fingers. Talk to me. So I did. I told him about missing nursing, about feeling adrift without my own purpose, about loving our life together but feeling like I'd lost part of myself in the process of building it, about wanting more than being the woman who waited at home while he ran an empire. He listened without interrupting, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. When I finally ran out of words, he was quiet for a long moment. I should have seen it, he said finally. I've been so focused on keeping you safe, on making sure the baby was protected, that I forgot to ask what you needed. He shook his head. I'm sorry. I'm not looking for an apology. I'm looking for a solution. Then let's find one. He leaned forward. What would make you happy? If you could have anything, what would it be? I want to work. Not here, not in the family business, but something real. Something that uses my skills. I met his eyes. I want to help people again. It's who I am. There's a clinic, Dongwoo said slowly, in the old part of the city. It serves the workers, the people who can't afford proper health care. They've been struggling for funding for years. You want me to work at a charity clinic. I want you to run one. His eyes were bright with something that looked like excitement. We'll fund it properly. Staff it with good people. You can work as much or as little as you want. Set your own schedule around the baby. He paused. It wouldn't be the emergency room, but it would be yours. I stared at him, my heart swelling with a love so intense it almost hurt. You'd do that. I'd do anything for you. Haven't you figured that out yet? He pulled me gently to my feet and wrapped his arms around me, my belly pressed between us. You're not just a part of my life, Tessa. You're the best part. If you need something to feel whole, then I'll move heaven and earth to give it to you. I buried my face in his chest, overwhelmed by emotion. I love you. I love you too. He kissed the top of my head. Now, let's go tell my grandmother you've agreed to run a free clinic for the poor. She's going to be horrified and delighted in equal measure. 2 months later, I went into labor in the middle of the night. It was too early, 36 weeks instead of the full 40. Dr. Kim came rushing from Seoul, and the household descended into controlled chaos as Dongwoo paced outside the delivery room like a caged animal. You need to calm down, Yunji told him. I could hear her voice through the door, steady and unflappable as always. She's strong. The baby is strong. Pacing a hole in the floor isn't going to help either of them. I should be in there. You'd faint within 5 minutes. I've seen you handle gunfights without blinking, but blood makes you go pale as rice paper. That's different. It's really not. I would have laughed if I hadn't been in the middle of the most intense pain I'd ever experienced. And I'd been stabbed once by a patient having a psychotic break, so that was saying something. Push, Dr. Kim commanded. One more big push. I pushed. I screamed. I gripped the hand of the nurse beside me so hard I probably broke bones. And then, suddenly, there was crying. Not mine, though I was crying too, but the high, thin wail of a newborn taking her first breaths. It's a girl, Dr. Kim announced, and the world narrowed to a single point. The tiny, perfect, angry creature being placed on my chest. She was beautiful, wrinkled and red, and absolutely furious at being expelled from her warm, comfortable home, but beautiful. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her fists waving in protest, and her lungs were clearly in excellent working order based on the volume of her screams. Hi, baby, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Hi, I'm your mom. The door burst open and Dongwoo stumbled in, Yunji's warnings forgotten. He stopped short at the sight of us, me exhausted and sweaty in the hospital bed, our daughter screaming on my chest. Is everything. She's perfect, I said. Come meet your daughter. He approached like he was walking toward something sacred, his eyes wide with wonder. When he reached the bed, he reached out with trembling fingers to touch the baby's cheek. She stopped crying, just like that, as if his touch was all she'd been waiting for. Her tiny face turned toward his hand, and her eyes, dark like his, cracked open for the first time. "Hello, little one," Dongwoo whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm your appa. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you're safe and loved and happy." He looked at me, tears cutting tracks down his face. "Thank you. Thank you for her. Thank you for everything." "We made her together," I said. "You don't have to thank me. I'm going to thank you anyway." He leaned down and kissed me, soft and sweet, every day for the rest of my life. We named her Lim Soo-min. Soo for long life and purity, Min for cleverness and quickness. Grandmother Haesuk had suggested the name, and it felt right. A bridge between cultures, easy enough for my American family to pronounce, but meaningful in Korean tradition. The first weeks of motherhood were a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and a love so overwhelming it sometimes felt like drowning. Soo-min was a demanding baby, colicky and restless, rarely sleeping for more than 2 hours at a stretch. But she was also fiercely alert, her dark eyes tracking movement around the room, her tiny hands grasping at everything within reach. "She's going to be trouble," Dongwoo said one night as we sat together in the nursery, both of us exhausted but unable to stop staring at the miracle we'd created. "She has your stubborn streak." "She has your intensity," I countered. "Look at the way she watches everything. She's already calculating. She's 3 weeks old. Never too early to start." He laughed quietly, careful not to wake the baby who had finally, blessedly, fallen asleep. "I never thought I'd have this. Any of this. A family. Someone who loves me. A child." His voice grew thick with emotion. "Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I have to check that you're both still there. That I didn't dream the whole thing." "We're not going anywhere," I said, leaning into his shoulder. "You're stuck with us now." "Good." He pressed a kiss to my temple. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Grandmother Haesuk met her great-granddaughter on Sumin's 5th day of life. We brought the baby to her room, where she waited propped against her mountain of cushions, looking frilier than I'd ever seen her, but with eyes that burned with fierce joy. "Give her to me," she commanded, holding out her arms. Dongwoo carefully placed Soo-min in her great-grandmother's embrace. The old woman stared down at the baby for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her weathered face. "She has the Lim eyes," Haesuk said. "Strong, determined. She'll be a force to be reckoned with." "Like her great-grandmother," I said. Haesuk's smile widened, like all the women in this family. She looked at me with something that might have been approval. "You've done well, Tessa Collins. Better than I expected." "Thank you, grandmother." "Don't thank me yet. Raising a limb is not for the faint of heart." But her voice was warm, and when she looked back down at Soo-min, her expression softened into pure love. "Hello, little one. I'm your great-grandmother. I'm going to teach you everything I know about surviving in this world." "Maybe we can hold off on the survival lessons until she can walk," Dongwoo suggested. "Nonsense. It's never too early to learn." But Haesuk's eyes were twinkling as she said it, and I realized she was joking. Or mostly joking, anyway. We stayed with her for an hour, watching her hold and talk to Soo-min with a tenderness I wouldn't have thought her capable of. When we finally took the baby back, so Haesuk could rest, the old woman grabbed my hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice rough, "for giving me this, for giving him this." She nodded toward Dongwoo. "I can go in peace now, knowing he won't be alone." "You're not going anywhere," I said firmly. "Soo-min needs to know her great-grandmother. I'll stay as long as I can. Haesuk's grip tightened briefly. But when it's time, don't mourn me too long. I've lived a good life, a full life, and now I've seen the next generation begin. She smiled. That's more than most people get. The clinic opened when Soo-min was 4 months old. It was small at first, just 3 examination rooms in a converted warehouse near the port, but it was mine. I'd hired the staff myself, designed the treatment protocols, negotiated with suppliers for medical equipment. Dongwoo had provided the funding, but he'd kept his hands off the actual operation, letting me build something that was truly independent. We served the workers from the fish market and the docks, the elderly who couldn't afford hospital care, the women who needed reproductive health services without judgment or paperwork. Anyone who walked through our doors was treated, regardless of their ability to pay. "You're going to bankrupt us," Dongwoo joked one evening as I showed him the monthly patient numbers. "You have more money than God. I think you can handle a few extra bandages." "A few extra bandages," she says. "You treated 300 patients last month." 312. I couldn't keep the pride out of my voice. "And next month, we're opening the pediatric wing." He pulled me close, careful not to disturb Soo-min, who was sleeping in the carrier strapped to my chest. "I'm proud of you, you know. What you've built here, it matters. It's not enough. There's so much need, so many people who—" "It's not enough yet," he corrected. "But it's a start, and starts matter." He kissed my forehead. "You're changing things, Tessa. One patient at a time." I leaned into him, exhausted but content. This was what I'd been missing. This sense of purpose, of using my skills for something meaningful. I loved being a mother. I loved being with Dongwoo. But I needed this too, this piece of myself that was separate from them. "I've been thinking," I said. "That's usually dangerous. About the future. About us." I pulled back to look at him. "You asked me to marry you a year ago. I said to ask again in a year." Dongwoo went very still. Is it a year already?" "Close enough." I smiled at his sudden nervousness. "Ask me again. Now." Now. He took a breath, then dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the clinic lobby. Soo-min stirred against my chest, disturbed by the sudden movement. "Tessa Collins," he said, his voice unsteady. "You came into my life when I was broken and bleeding. You saw who I really was and loved me anyway. You gave me a daughter, a family, a reason to be better than I thought I could be." His eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Will you marry me? Not because of contracts or arrangements or family expectations. Just because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it." I looked down at the man kneeling before me. The criminal, the savior, the father of my child, the love of my life. "Yes," I said. "Yes, I'll marry you." He surged to his feet and kissed me so thoroughly that Soo-min woke up and started crying in protest. "Sorry, baby girl," he murmured against my lips. "Your parents are having a moment. Our parents are embarrassing," I translated, bouncing gently to soothe her. "Get used to it. We're going to be embarrassing for a very long time." The wedding was not what I expected. I'd assumed Dongwoo would want something traditional, a massive ceremony with hundreds of guests, formal Korean dress, all the trappings of his family status and wealth. Instead, he suggested something small. "Just us," he said when we discussed plans. "My grandmother, Soo-jin, your brother, a few close friends. No spectacle, no politics, just 2 people making promises. Your grandmother will be disappointed. My grandmother wants me to be happy. She doesn't care about guest lists." He paused. "Do you want a big wedding?" I thought about it, about the magazines I'd flipped through as a teenager, dreaming of white dresses and flower arrangements, about the elaborate ceremonies I'd seen in movies and on TV. "No," I said honestly. "I want you. I want our daughter. I want to make promises I actually mean instead of performing for an audience." "Then that's what we'll do." We were married on a spring morning, in the garden where we'd had so many important conversations. Grandmother Haesuk sat in a chair of honor, Soo-min in her lap, both of them watching with matching expressions of regal approval. Soo-jin stood as my witness, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my old monthly rent. Darius had flown in from Chicago, looking uncomfortable in his suit but beaming with pride. The ceremony was short and simple. We exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, promises to be honest, to be patient, to love each other through whatever challenges lay ahead. We exchanged rings. We kissed while Soo-min babbled happily in her great-grandmother's arms. And then it was done. I was Lim Tessa, or Tessa Lim, or just Tessa, wife and mother and nurse, navigating a life that was stranger and more beautiful than anything I'd ever imagined. How do you feel? Dongwoo asked as we posed for photos afterward. Like myself, I said, but more. He smiled, pulling me closer. That's exactly how I feel too. The months that followed were the happiest of my life. The clinic expanded twice, first into a neighboring building, then into a proper medical center with a full staff and a training program for local nurses. I worked 3 days a week, spending the rest of my time with Soo-min, who was growing from a demanding infant into a stubborn, hilarious toddler with her father's intensity and my complete disregard for rules. Grandmother Haesuk's health remained stable, defying her doctor's predictions. She attributed it to sheer spite. "Death will come for me when I'm ready," she said. "And I'm not ready yet. I have too much to teach this little one." Soo-min adored her great-grandmother. They spent hours together in Haesuk's room, the old woman telling stories in a mixture of Korean and English while Soo-min listened with rapt attention. I sometimes wondered how much she actually understood. Then I'd see her mimicking Haesuk's imperious gestures and realize she was absorbing everything. Dongwoo continued running the family operations with an iron hand and surprising compassion. The Jong family had retreated to Seoul after the failed coup, their ambitions in Busan thoroughly crushed. Other rivals learned quickly that attacking Lim interests meant swift and decisive retaliation. But he was also pushing the legitimate businesses harder than ever. The shipping company expanded into green energy. The construction firm pivoted toward sustainable development. The hotels became models for ethical labor practices. Trying to go straight? I teased him one evening as we reviewed the quarterly reports together. "Trying to build something worth leaving to our daughter," he corrected. "I don't want her to inherit an empire of blood and violence. I want to give her options. Even if she chooses the blood and violence, then at least it'll be her choice." His expression was serious. I never had that option. I was born into this life, and by the time I was old enough to question it, there was no way out. I don't want that for Soo-min. She might surprise you. She might want to be a doctor, or a teacher, or a professional athlete. She might. He smiled. "And I'll support whatever she chooses, as long as she's happy." Soo-min's first birthday party was an elaborate affair despite my protests. "She won't even remember it," I argued as the event planners took over the estate grounds. "But we will," Dongwoo countered. "And so will everyone else. This is about establishing her place in the world. She's 1 year old. Her place in the world is wherever the food is." "Exactly. And today the food is here." I gave up arguing. There were some battles that weren't worth fighting. And anyway, Soo-min seemed delighted by the chaos, the balloons, the decorations, the endless stream of guests bearing gifts. She spent most of the party in grandmother Haesuk's lap, surveying her kingdom with the satisfaction of a tiny empress. "She's going to be formidable," Haesuk said, watching Soo-min grab a fistful of cake and stuff it in her mouth. "A true Lim." "She's also a Collins," I reminded her. "We're pretty formidable too." "I know." Haesuk's eyes met mine. "That's why I approved of you from the beginning." "You approved of me?" "I knew within 5 minutes of meeting you that you were exactly what my grandson needed." Someone who wouldn't bow to him. Someone who would challenge him. Someone strong enough to stand beside him instead of behind him. She smiled. I just wanted to make sure you knew it too. I thought about everything that had happened since that first meeting. The tests I'd passed. The challenges I'd overcome. The family I'd fought to protect. I know it now, I said. Good. Haesuk turned back to watching the party, but not before squeezing my hand briefly. Then, my work here is done. Grandmother Haesuk died 3 months after Sumin's first birthday. It was peaceful in the end. She went to sleep one night and simply didn't wake up, her heart finally giving out after 93 years of stubborn survival. We found her in the morning. Her face relaxed into an expression of contentment I'd rarely seen in life. The funeral was a massive affair. Hundreds of mourners, traditional rites that lasted for days, a procession through the city that stopped traffic for hours. Haesuk had been a legend in Busan, feared and respected in equal measure. Her passing marked the end of an era. I stood beside Dongwoo throughout it all, holding his hand as he received condolences from politicians and criminals alike. His face was composed, showing nothing of the grief I knew was tearing him apart inside. Only at night, in the privacy of our room, did he let himself break down. She was the only parent I really had, he said, his voice raw with tears. After my father died, she was everything. Mother, father, teacher, guide. And now she's gone. She loved you so much, I said, holding him close. She was so proud of you, of who you've become. I keep thinking about all the things I never said, all the conversations we never had, all the time I wasted on business when I could have been with her. She knew Dongwoo. She knew everything you felt. She told me so more than once. She did. She said you were the best thing she ever did. Raising you, shaping you, watching you become the man you are. She said it made everything else worthwhile. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, I miss her. I know. I miss her too. We lay together in the darkness, grieving for the fierce old woman who had brought us together, who had given us her blessing, who had lived just long enough to see her great-granddaughter's first birthday. She always said she'd go on her own terms, Dongwoo murmured finally. I think she was waiting, making sure we were okay, making sure Su-min was established. And then she let go. That sounds like her. She was impossible, demanding, terrifying. He almost smiled. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to live up to her expectations. So will I said, but I think that's exactly what she wanted. 2 years after grandmother Haesuk's death, I received an unexpected phone call. I was at the clinic, finishing up paperwork after a long day, when my assistant knocked on the door. There's a woman here to see you, she said, looking uncomfortable. She says her name is Alice Hartwell. She says you know her. The name hit me like a physical blow. Alice Hartwell, Dongwoo's ex-wife, the woman who tried to poison our relationship 3 years ago. Send her in, I said, keeping my voice steady. Alice looked exactly as I remembered. Elegant, beautiful, cold. She walked into my office like she owned it, settling into the chair across from my desk without waiting to be invited. Tessa, she said. Or should I call you Mrs. Lim? Either is fine. What are you doing here, Alice? I wanted to see you, to see what you've built. She gestured at the office around us. This is impressive. A free clinic for the poor. Very noble. Did you come all the way to Busan to compliment my clinic? No. Her composure cracked slightly. I came to apologize. Whatever I had expected, it wasn't that. Apologize, I repeated, for what I said when we first met, for trying to turn you against Dongwoo. She looked down at her hands, which were twisted together in her lap. I was angry, bitter. I wanted to believe he was incapable of love because it was easier than admitting I just wasn't the right person for him. That was 3 years ago. I know. I should have come sooner. But she stopped, took a breath. I was in a dark place for a long time. Drinking, making bad decisions, blaming everyone but myself for my problems. She met my eyes. I've been in recovery for 18 months. Part of the process is making amends. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation. But all I saw was a woman who looked tired and fragile and genuinely regretful. You hurt me, I said finally. What you said made me doubt everything. It almost destroyed what Dongwoo and I were building. I know, and I'm sorry. Her voice cracked. I was jealous. I could see that he loved you in a way he never loved me, that he was becoming something better with you. And instead of being happy for him, I tried to ruin it. Why? Because I was broken. Because I couldn't stand the thought of him being happy when I was miserable. She wiped her eyes. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I regret it. Every word. I sat back in my chair, processing. 3 years ago, this woman's cruelty had nearly derailed my entire life. Now here she was, humble and apologetic, asking for nothing but the chance to say sorry. Thank you, I said finally, for telling me this. You're not going to forgive me? I don't know yet, but I appreciate you coming. I appreciate you being honest. I paused. Are you okay? Really? Something in her expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, that I was asking. I'm getting better, day by day. Good. I stood and extended my hand. I hope you find what you're looking for, Alice, whatever that is. She shook my hand, her grip tentative. I hope so too. After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking about forgiveness and growth and the ways people can change. Then I called Dongwoo. You'll never guess who just visited me, I said. That night, after Soo-min was asleep, Dongwoo and I talked about Alice. She apologized, he said, disbelief evident in his voice. Alice actually apologized. She's in recovery, making amends, apparently. I shrugged. I think she genuinely regrets what she did. Do you believe her? I believe people can change. I believe she's trying. I leaned against him on the couch. I also believe that what she did doesn't matter anymore. We're past it. We built something strong enough to survive her poison. We did. His arm tightened around me. But I still hate her for what she put you through. Hate takes too much energy. I'd rather spend it on things that matter. Like what? Like you. Like Soo-min. Like the clinic and the future and figuring out what we want the next 10 years to look like. Dongwoo was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you want them to look like? It was a big question. A question I'd been thinking about for months. As the clinic grew, and Soo-min got older, and our life together became more stable. I want more children, I said. Maybe 2 more. I want Soo-min to have siblings. I want that too. I want to expand the clinic into a proper hospital, something that can serve the whole city, not just the Port District. We can make that happen. I want to stay in Busan, build our life here. But I also want to travel, show Soo-min the world. Let her understand that there's more out there than just Korea. Where do you want to go? Everywhere. Chicago, so she can know where I come from. Europe, Africa, South America. I want her to see everything. Dongwoo smiled. That's a lot of traveling. We have time. I turned to look at him. What do you want? For the next 10 years. He thought about it. I want to get the family business fully legitimate within the decade. No more gray areas. No more compromises. That's ambitious. It's necessary. For Soo-min. For any other children we have. I don't want them growing up the way I did. Always knowing that their family fortune is built on blood. Can you do it? Really? I don't know. But I'm going to try. His eyes met mine. With you beside me. Always, I said. That's one thing you never have to doubt. 5 years later, I stood in the lobby of the Lim Medical Center, watching the ribbon-cutting ceremony with tears in my eyes. It had taken years of work, but we'd done it. The clinic had grown into a full hospital, 300 beds, a trauma center, a pediatric wing, a maternity ward. We served thousands of patients every month, regardless of their ability to pay. Dongwoo stood beside me, holding our youngest, a 2-year-old boy named Minjun, who had his father's serious expression and my stubborn streak. Sumin, now 6 years old, was fidgeting in her formal dress, clearly eager to escape to the playground she'd spotted behind the building. "Mom," she whispered loudly, "is it almost over?" "Almost, baby. Just a few more minutes." "But I want to play." "I know. Be patient." She sighed dramatically, the gesture so perfectly inherited from her great-grandmother that I almost laughed. The mayor finished his speech and handed me the ceremonial scissors. I stepped forward, aware of the cameras and the crowd and the significance of this moment. "This hospital," I said, my voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "exists because we believe that healthcare is a right, not a privilege. Because we believe that every person, regardless of their income, their background, or their circumstances, deserves to be treated with dignity and compassion." I looked at Dongwoo, who nodded encouragingly. "I came to Korea 5 years ago as a stranger. I was lost, uncertain, carrying debts I didn't know how to repay. I never imagined I would end up here, in this city, with this family, building something that could help so many people." I smiled. Life rarely goes according to plan, but sometimes, if you're very lucky, it goes somewhere better. I cut the ribbon. The crowd cheered. Sumin immediately bolted for the playground, with Sujin chasing after her. "Well done," Dongwoo murmured in my ear. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have." He kissed my cheek. "You can do anything, Tessa Lim. That's one of the things I love most about you." That night, after the celebration, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Dongwoo and I sat together on the balcony of our bedroom, looking out at the lights of Busan spread below us. "Do you ever think about how we started?" I asked. "All the time. A contract, a desperate billionaire and a broke nurse, a dying grandmother and a fake engagement." I shook my head. "It sounds like a bad drama. It sounds like our life." He pulled me closer, and I wouldn't change a single thing. Not even the torture, the family coup, the death threats. Those I could have done without. He smiled. "But if any of it had been different, we might not be here now. And I can't imagine my life without you and the children." "Neither can I." We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the city below. I thought about everything that had brought us to this moment, the choices made and the chances taken, the love that had grown from the most unlikely circumstances. "Dongwoo." "Yes." "I'm pregnant again." He went very still. "Again." "Again." I watched his face, waiting for his reaction. "Number 4. I found out this morning." For a moment, he just stared at me. Then his face split into a grin, so wide it transformed his usually serious expression. "For children," he said wonderingly. "We're going to have 4 children. Unless it's twins." "Please don't joke about that." "Who says I'm joking?" He groaned, pulling me into his arms. "You're going to be the death of me." "Probably." I kissed him softly. "But it'll be worth it." And so here I am, Tessa Lim, formerly Tessa Collins, trauma nurse from Chicago with $200,000 in debt and a brother who needed help. Now, wife, mother of 4, it wasn't twins, thankfully, director of the largest free hospital in South Korea, partner to a reformed crime boss who's actually becoming a legitimate businessman, daughter-in-law to a legendary woman who died believing her family would continue strong. People ask me sometimes how I ended up here, how a girl from the south side of Chicago became part of one of the most powerful families in Asia. How I fell in love with a man who'd done terrible things and found a way to believe in his capacity for good. The truth is, I don't have a simple answer. I took a chance when I was desperate. I signed a contract I'd barely understood. I walked into a world of violence and power and ancient family traditions. And instead of running away, I found my place in it. I fell in love with a man who saw me, really saw me, from the moment we met, who challenged me to be more than I thought I could be, who gave me everything I needed while demanding nothing but my honesty in return. I built something meaningful, a hospital that helps thousands, a family that's stronger than blood, a life that's richer and stranger and more beautiful than anything I could have planned. Is it perfect? No. Dongwoo still has enemies. The world we live in is still dangerous. Our children will grow up with security details and complicated inheritances and the weight of a family name that carries as much burden as privilege. But we face it all together. Every challenge, every triumph, every ordinary Tuesday morning when the kids are fighting and the coffee's cold and the hospital's understaffed and life is just hard. Together. That's the answer, really. That's what I've learned in all these years. That love isn't about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It's about showing up, day after day, year after year, choosing each other even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. Dongwoo chose me when I was a stranger in his emergency room. I chose him when I was terrified and pregnant and unsure if he could really be trusted. We've kept choosing each other every day since, and we'll keep choosing each other for all the days to come. That's my story. Not a fairy tale, not a tragedy. Just a life, messy and complicated and absolutely worth living. Now it's your turn. What choices are you afraid to make? What chances are you hesitating to take? What love might be waiting for you on the other side of your fear? Whatever it is, I hope you find the courage to reach for it, because sometimes the most terrifying leaps lead to the most beautiful landings. Trust me, I would know. Thank you for joining Tessa and Dongwoo on their incredible journey of love, sacrifice, and transformation. Their story reminds us that love often finds us when we least expect it, and that the most powerful relationships are built not on perfect circumstances, but on the daily choice to stand together through everything life throws at us. Discussion question: would you have signed the contract that Tessa signed? What did this story teach you about the difference between arrangements and authentic love? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, what moment hit you the hardest? What would you have done differently? If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment below. Your engagement means everything, and it helps more people discover stories like this. Until next time, remember, the best love stories don't happen to perfect people. They happen to people brave enough to be imperfect together. See you in the next one.